What is up, everybody? Solomon here. Super excited to be with Genfinity, interviewing a multitude of builders across Web3. Really excited today to be diving deep into the weeds with Claudio from the UZH Blockchain Center. So one of the biggest educational institutions in the world. And what we're going to be talking about today is kind of some of the research driving forward tomorrow's decentralized systems, which is really cool. It's rare, I'll do these intros sometimes, Claudio, and you and I did one a couple of weeks ago where we kind of introduced ourselves, and that call in and of itself was like an hour as far as like us going back and forth. So I think this is going to be a pretty good one. But can you give us an intro of yourself, a little bit about the work you do at the University of Zurich? And thank you for joining today.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for the kind introduction. My name is Claudio Tessone. I am professor of blockchain and distributed ledger technologies at the University of Zurich. I am based at the computer science department here in our university, but I am also the chairman and one of the co-founders of the Blockchain Center of our university. Our university is small, perhaps by international standards, but it's still the largest in Switzerland. And we have 7 different faculties, and the Blockchain Center in our university tries to better understand blockchains, distributed ledger technologies, decentralized applications from a completely multidisciplinary lens. And I think that this is something unique we are bringing to our research, but also to the educational programs that we offer to students all around the world.
Awesome. Well, I know to kind of kick off here, I guess we'll talk about kind of the next layer of the internet. That's one of the ways that I've kind of phrased blockchain distributed ledger, as far as what the internet did for information, what kind of the blockchain and distributed ledger is going to do for accounting and value. But the question I kind of have for you is, as we move into this kind of from the information age into the value age, where are we at on the journey of blockchain distributed ledger kind of evolving into a foundational layer, like a used all the time layer of the internet itself?
Mm-hmm. You see, perhaps my answer is disappointing, that I think that we are still at very early stages of that transition. And not because we didn't do a lot of progresses in the last 1.5 decades in which we have known blockchains. We have done a lot of things, from thinking of them just as payment infrastructure like Bitcoin, to later be able to build a full applications based on blockchains. However, you see why I'm saying that we are in very early stages and we are still in very exploratory phases of the development of this ecosystem is because we still do not know how to systematically produce decentralized applications, blockchains, and so on. And this is specifically difficult because blockchains rely a lot on economic incentives, coordination of multiple actors, the alignment of the incentives of people that have completely disparate interests. And we still do not know how to do that. We started to think about these issues, and that's why you see a lot of evolutions in the protocols trying to change the structure of these incentives of the governance and these kind of things. Still, there is not a textbook that we can point to someone that wants to develop a new system and say, this is the recipe that you need to follow. And once this kind of knowledge is available, it's also something that will allow a much simpler transition towards the usage of these systems. And that's why I think that there is still a long journey ahead, but a very exciting one.
Yeah, I did an interview earlier this week with Mondelez, and Mondelez is like one of the bigger consumer packaged goods organizations. So like, Oreo, Ritz, Toblerone, like all those things kind of sit underneath Mondelez. He actually said something very similar. He's like, we need to get to a point with blockchain and distributed ledger where these proof of concepts are able to be like rapidly deployed. And there's not kind of all this like hand holding with like, here's how the technology works and here's applications that could work. So it's interesting when you say that. So it kind of leads me into what we're witnessing as a society, which I don't think many people maybe see, certainly not the mass populace. Not only blockchain and distributed ledger, but digital identity and artificial intelligence and agentic AI. All this stuff is kind of starting to overlap and feed into each other. But again, it's very early in that. What type of role do you think something like AI is going to play to help to rapidly deploy blockchain distributed ledger solutions, and maybe just broad thoughts on the convergence of technology, because there's a lot going on for us as human beings right now?
Yeah, exactly. And it is harder and harder to absorb how accelerated all these things are starting to take place. With respect to the convergence of AI, I think that on blockchain, for example, and this kind of pervasive technologies, there is one aspect that is important, that is inherent as well to the blockchain-based system. So this automatization of organizations. I think that one of the key killer features of blockchains is the fact that you can create and put into an automated system all the rules of interaction of a specific organization and let it work in an automated manner. I think that there, which is an external use of AI for the management of these autonomous organizations, is one area in which I see a lot of potential, specifically because the blockchain and the rules that are developed and deployed there anchor a lot the degrees of freedom that the organization has. And I think that in general, when you let an agentic AI, for example, at least in the current incarnations that we have in 2025, their quality starts to degrade the longer they are acting. And I think that exactly blockchain as well serves as a kind of a layer of stability in terms of which are the expectations in terms of behavior of these systems. This is one aspect. I think that there are other elements that are specifically interesting, that is allowing people, that is, for example, creating the models, feeding them with data, and also the data owners to have a better integration as we were saying before, trying to align the incentives of all the different stakeholders. And one of the things that has been happening in the past years, like it has been happening all the time with all the harvesting tools of data that is available online, is the fact that authors do not get the proper retribution. And my hope is that a blockchain is actually an enabler of this kind of better environment for the providers of the models, but also for the providers of the data that is used inside of the models. There are other things, obviously, in which AI is going to contribute a lot, like, for example, lowering a lot the thresholds towards of what Mondelez was saying as well, trying to reach end products at a much lower rapid cycles. I think, however, that this is a part in which we are still very far away from trying to reach.
Yeah. Well, but kind of in note with what you said, I think it's going to be really interesting with data. You know, most people maybe don't realize that with artificial intelligence, these large language models ingest just a lot of data. And even right now, AI is so early that a lot of the data that it will spit out to you, I'm not going to go super down the rabbit hole of AI, because we could literally probably have a couple of hour discussion just on that. It spits out kind of a lot of nonsensical information sometimes too, that sometimes just isn't factual. So like, what to me is interesting is, you know, if you're a researcher and your data gets utilized in a meaningful way in the future in one of these models, maybe there's a kickback and incentivization and stuff for you as well. I think, you know, all of this kind of in alignment with this kind of tokenized economy, I would say over the past 12 to 24 months, 18 months, let's say, we've seen a huge ramp up in real world asset tokenization. All the technology we've talking about certainly going to play a role in some way, shape, or form in the future. But I'm curious what your thought process is on kind of a tokenized society and how that might change how we measure ownership, value, or even participation into the economy from like an individual level. I know it's a really broad question.
No. I think that it's a broad. I am trying to anchor it in some starting statement. So one of the main issues that you have once you have these tokens that are so liquid, and also some readily available to you is something only akin to the transition that had, for example, the United States with participation in stock markets of the pension funds and these kind of things that created an unbelievable liquidity inside of the market, but also fostered a lot of economic sectors. I think that with this transition, this is not only limited to specific jurisdictions, it is allowing a very accelerated takeover of new ideas on the one side that allow the development of new protocols and new systems built on them. But there is two facets on what you just said, Ryan. On the one side is we have the real world assets, but at the same time, we also took, or let's say traditional financial sector also took much more seriously some of the native tokens that are inherent to many of these protocols that are built based on blockchains. Ethereum, Bitcoins, and many others now are just additional assets that a lot of the traditional financial institutions have even in their own basket. And it is a very interesting thing because it is not only that we have the real world assets that are now also tokenized, but also that the native assets are also more recognized as some sort of signal of value, which is natural because their value comes from a lot of network effects that are happening inside of them, okay? Inside of the systems, okay? Because we have a lot of usage and so on. And so these interactions between the real world assets and digital counterparts is a very interesting accelerating factor as well of the conjunction of these two ecosystems.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I won't go too far off down the rabbit hole here, but I think especially even over the past few months, you kind of see these bigger products spinning up that are just like basket products that are like, hey, we're just going to take a shot at all 20 or 30 of the top things across blockchain and crypto. And I kind of go back and forth and argue with myself a little bit where I'm like, are we late enough with blockchain and distributed ledger where we're not going to really have any of these general purpose blockchains spin up in 5 years and be able to compete? Or are we still early enough where maybe you do have a general purpose thing spin up in a handful of years? I just wonder where we're at as far as adoption, at least from the network standpoint too, because it seems like some of these networks, I mean, it's certainly Bitcoin. I think everybody could say, Bitcoin is kind of where it's at, and we could probably have another discussion on Bitcoin and if it stays number one forever. Ethereum and EVM seem like they're kind of has a lot of kind of widespread adoption, but yeah, I just wonder from the network standpoint with real world assets and where they're living, like what does that mean for the ability for newer networks and new innovation to come and compete with some of these networks? Like maybe just do you have broad thoughts on that? Or like, do you ever think about like, are some of these networks far enough along where it's going to be very hard for them to die, basically?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I do not have a clear answer, but I will try to structure my thoughts on the topic, okay? So I really think that there is a level of maturity of the ecosystem in which we learn to coexist with what blockchains are still able to deliver us. Okay, we learn to coexist with the fact that you have a expressive yet a very memory constraint. For example, smart contracts in Ethereum, systems that enable larger ability to have larger organizations running inside of them are going to be much more important in the future, okay? And that's why there are some protocols that are trying to do this naturally. On the other side, you see that there is innovation that is still happening at the level of governance of these layer ones and economic incentives running behind. And as I said before, I don't think that we still nailed it down, how we see that we will be able to build a new layer one whenever we need it. And network effects are still simpler to be built. My argument would be actually the fact that the more we are used to, or some of us are used to run consensus nodes in some environments, if we get the right incentives, there is the cost of transitioning towards another system is also very low. So I would not say that the innovation is going to be stalled. I think that disruptive innovations are still just expected inside of the ecosystem. Perhaps it will take a few years because also what disruption means is going to change over time. But I still see a lot of potential because, once again, the marginal cost of having a new system that actually adheres to our own internal incentives is lower now because also we are acquiring a lot of knowledge in terms of what is it required and why should we jump into something that is really changing the status quo.
Yeah. I think, you know, in blockchain and crypto, and we and I talked about this before too. I know you were mentioning DAOs and decentralized autonomous organizations. And I think when we were talking before, I find it so interesting that like blockchain seems to have these back to the future moments where, like, I remember in 2016, 2017, and 2018, there, you know, micropayments. Everybody was kind of talking about micropayments, but it was way too early for micropayments. And now now in 2025, I see a lot of entities talking about micropayments again. I think it's the same thing with kind of like tokenization of,
correct, and fractionalization and these kind of things. We heard all these narratives 6-7 years ago. Absolutely.
So what's interesting to me is that we always frame all of this stuff like, doesn't matter what innovation is happening in crypto, we always have to put Web3 in front of it, it seems like, and just create a new term. Like Web3 gaming is a good example of that. Mm-hmm. What is your thought process in like a decade and a half, whenever it may be, when blockchain and distributed ledger are just kind of naturally a part of our everyday lives? Are we still going to be inventing terms like Web3 gaming, or are we just going to call it gaming and blockchain is going to be integrated somehow?
Yeah,
you get the question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that to me it's very important that when blockchains are mature enough, we will even not be talking about blockchains anymore. Like we are not talking today about TCP or about RPC protocols and these kind of things. So the day in which the blockchain is integrated in our lives is when we use it pervasively in completely different contexts, and then it is not part of a new jargon, as you were correctly saying, but it is part of our daily experience and reduces friction in a lot of our daily interactions. When you are today using the mobile phone app to move from A to B in your city, is reducing a friction that is unfolding the map and trying to look into what is happening there. Blockchains is going to show a similar experience in a few years from now when we are actually able to just seamlessly exchange tokens that represent, for example, our participation on an event or receives a micro certification for a short course that we took or an additional qualification, or when we and within perhaps the traditional financial system, we are able to send assets to our relatives in the other corner of the world in a fraction of a second, which is possible now. The point is that all the overhead that you have in order to do that is still large if you are not already in the ecosystem. Once you are inside of using blockchain-based applications, all these things just happen naturally as well. But it is not certainly for a general audience yet.
Yeah, it's not like you and I aren't doing an hour-long podcast about how amazing it is that I was able to email you, and you might use Yahoo and I use Gmail in 2025. We're not like, this is amazing.
Exactly. Yeah, we are still talking about these kind of things. Absolutely.
So, and I think it's been. Go ahead.
No, please. The only thing I want to say is that also a lot of people that is already in the ecosystem are going to say that perhaps all our conversation is very dated as well, which is also or my last points are dated, which is also correct. We know what it is that this technology allows for a long period. The difference now is that this system have shown to be resilient for the last 15 years already. We have a lot of blockchain-based systems that survived a lot of technical attacks, economic attacks, in terms of concentration, trying to disrupt their normal functioning, and they have shown to go back to operate as normal. Okay, most of them, I would not say that all of them, but you see that they show an incredible resilience, even if they are highly explorative. And this is also fascinating from the point of view of how much we can rely on them as well in the future, because they have already proven themselves.
100%. I think we've definitely seen an evolution across these networks. As a sidebar, like I've been doing research into like some of the banks and all the government stuff for like years at this point in time, and I won't get too into the weeds with it, but there's a clear narrative shift that seems to happen every couple of years. Where I remember in 2016 and 2017, I would find PDFs from central banks and all this stuff, and it was very, the application of blockchain may be interesting, but the risks far outweigh any sort of benefits. And then 3 or 4 years later, we're doing proof of concepts here, and here, but there's still a lot of risk. And now 2024, 2025, I find documents and it's like, there's still risk, but the benefits seem to, and it seems to be this kind of like slow thing. And then stuff starts kind of going live. I want to ask you, I know UZH deals with a lot of different ecosystems, and you guys are certainly agnostic in a way from a blockchain and crypto standpoint. But what is the relationship like with the Hashgraph Association and your thoughts just kind of broadly on the Hedera ecosystem? I know you were mentioning that just a handful of months ago, I think Lehman was there at one of your events, but just anything you want to say kind of about the ecosystem, and then you can certainly talk broadly too about the other networks and stuff like that you guys.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Actually, we have a very interesting collaboration with Hedera, like with some other ecosystems. I were mentioning we start there. In many cases, we have a lot of. I apologize.
You're good.
Good. You see, it was a busy day. So now I started with Hedera, which is the following. The THA specifically has a very strong interest in trying to divulge much more what is known, what is possible to do with Hedera, but also to explain what blockchains are. And therefore, we have a lot of collaborations in terms of educational programs, trying to engage students from all around the world to receive unbiased education here at the University of Zurich. This is something that is very interesting. We have been also discussing different ways of creating this kind of systems, that is micro-certification, with the value added here at the University of Zurich, which is that we have been already testing with the back office administration of the University of Zurich, the implementation of micro-certification really at the level of the department. It's not just a proof of concept in which 3 of us meet in an office, in a lab, and start to issue certifications as NFTs in a smart contract, and we're satisfied with that. We went into all the process of admission of the students, looked into what it means in terms of identity and onboarding, how we see that we can interface it with the rest of the Swiss universities, and how we see that we can issue this proof of studies, for example, for the students as part of the evolution of the digital systems that we are using now, that are not very different from what was used 50 years ago at the end of the day, from a processes perspective. This was another thing that is a very interesting collaboration that we have. The thing that is interesting for us from Hedera perspective is manifold. I just briefly mentioned which is our research, at least in the Blockchain Center. We're very proud of the research that we do in blockchain analytics, but blockchain analytics for example, to better understand and trace origin of funds, to better fight in transparent transactions or origin of funds inside of in this flow of crypto assets. So for AML and implications and onboarding of clients in financial institutions. We are also very interested in crypto economics and the actual economic functioning of blockchain-based systems and how we see that a set of incentives eventually paints out in the circulation of these native assets, for example, cryptocurrencies that you have in each one of the permissionless blockchains. The relationship between design choices and macroeconomic effects is something that is very interesting to us. And there is also another dimension that is so important, that is how we see that you create and design a governance that is robust to withhold the test of time, okay? And this has been very challenging in most of the blockchain-based systems. Closing your question, I think that Hedera has interpreted this in a completely different way than what we have been, or people had envisioned for blockchain-based environments, exactly targeting corporate adoption and adhering to a completely different range of rules with respect on how is it that the ecosystem is governed. And this is something that is, as a case study, it's a very interesting situation, because actually you have their own stakeholders also bringing use cases into the ecosystem, which is very forward-looking, I have to say. Of course, we have, as you said, the kind of research that we perform in general tries to incorporate all the variety of solutions proposed inside of the ecosystem, because there is a lot of innovation and a lot of different ways of trying to solve the problems in layer ones and layer twos, okay? I am talking about governance problems. I'm talking about how is it that we incentivize and which is our target group. How is it that we want the network to look like? Do we want a network that is fully decentralized? Do we want to have a core of participation that is the one that is running the infrastructure because it is very resource intensive? All these kind of things. Everybody has different ideas, and there are multiple ways in which the answers can be put depending on which is the objective that the creators have. And it is very interesting to see and to analyze all this variety. It's a fantastic.
No, I totally agree. I mean, anybody in crypto and blockchain, distributed ledger, like I'm telling you, Claudio, we're probably gonna have to do a couple of these interviews, but because I'm just like, we've talked about stuff, and I'm like, I could go down the rabbit hole with this, like super.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've seen a big, I mean, you could almost pick any network, go wherever you want to go and kind of close your eyes and pick a network, and every single one of them is going to have a different journey towards decentralization. Like some of them, start off kind of a little bit more centralized and then decentralize over time. Some of them just, start kind of a little bit more decentralized, but then you kind of see the corporate and the real world adoption stuff having to creep in eventually anyways. I wonder, can full decentralization, I think there always maybe has to be some level of management there, but I want to get more into UZH here because I don't want to go too, I tend to get excited and go down the rabbit hole.
We will keep talking at some point, perhaps.
I know. I would love if you could touch base on some of the initiatives specifically that you guys are working through. Like I know that you have, a bunch of news you're consistently pushing. You do a bunch of events. You have, from the membership standpoint, quite a bit going on. You have certifications going on. Just maybe in a broad scope, like what are you kind of most excited about some of the work that you guys are doing at the university?
Yeah, exactly. So we have it. I am happy that we are expanding our continuous education programs, like, for example, the certificates on blockchain and now in crypto compliance. Here in Switzerland, it has become more and more important, compliance, because a lot of financial institutions are adopting crypto assets as just another product that they are offering. And we are really happy with this as well. But if there is something here at the Blockchain Center makes us very excited about education is the summer school that we offer since 2020 for international students, the summer school deep dive into blockchain. And we started in during the pandemic. It was an online program, which is part of the international summer schools of our university. But eventually, the program started to jump into a class of its own. International summer schools in our university last for 3 weeks, and they welcome students from all around the world. And eventually, because it was quite a successful program, we started to have roughly 80 students here at the University of Zurich. And this is like this since we have been, before it was 70, now it was 80. And this is the maximum capacity that we can host, because remember, we need to host roughly 70 students from other parts of the world coming for 3 weeks. And because we had a lot of demand for this program, but also because for us it's very important to have a course in which students from all around the world, the students from jurisdictions, from geographical areas that really can benefit from a high-level blockchain education, we could not host them all. So what we decided to do is to host, starting from 2025, a second campus in Cape Town in South Africa. And we welcome there roughly 45 students from many different countries. I'm really happy that there were students from the Americas, from Asia as well, going to South Africa. So in total, we had in 2025, 140 students. And what we did was we brought researchers from the Blockchain Center there for the 3 weeks. We had some of the sessions live from Zurich to Cape Town, others live from Cape Town to Zurich. We had practical sessions during the 3 weeks. They had the final projects, they had the prizes at the end. And we had a fantastic environment in the 2 locations. We had a lot of academic visits. We always replicated academic visits. Whenever we had an academic visit here in Zurich, we had a related activity as well in Cape Town. So we always were keeping up to date, preserving the quality of the program. We have every year 60 lecturers. To all of them, I am really grateful because they make the program a fantastic experience. It is a program that encompasses an introduction to the technologies, but also an introduction to the economic incentives, to economics, to cryptoeconomics, and also to governance and regulation. And then we have a fantastic lineup of the most fascinating protocols. Every year we change a lot the program, and this was something that makes us very happy. But this year, for example, Lemon was there. We had also representatives from Cardano, from Polkadot, from Avalanche, Ethereum, you name it, everybody, ICP, and we're really thankful to them all for their contribution to the summer school, because they enrich a lot the experience for the students. And it is this year we had students from 72 different countries, and this is something that makes us very proud.
Yeah, that's crazy. 72 different areas, or 72 different countries, you said?
Yes.
That's pretty crazy. I mean, I know one thing that's been interesting to me is, you know, hosting some of these like hackathon ramp downs. And I guess twofold, where number one, it seems like there is a lot of traction around, you know, coding and developer, being a developer, like in some of these more, I would say like emerging economies, like Africa certainly seems to have like a lot of people just willing to jump in and build on blockchain and crypto. India is another one. That's just wild. One thing I think, since I always tell this story, so like my oldest daughter was in middle school and she came home one day and she's like, I learned about savings accounts today. And she's like, you know, and our teacher said that the reason that savings accounts are good is because you put your money in a bank and then it goes into a vault and then it earns more money. And I told her, I'm like, I want to see this vault because I don't think this vault exists. So how, like, the question that I kind of have here is, with all this stuff converging, like technology wise, you know, I kind of look at the youth as being very instrumental about what blockchain and distributed ledger AI is really going to look like, because they're building some really innovative stuff, like the younger people in these classes. What are your kind of thoughts on how important education is going to be for blockchain, for distributed ledger, maybe for AI? Like, do you think that I guess do you think in primary schools that we teaching about blockchain and distributed ledger in the future, or do you think that that's going to stay kind of at the university level for a certain amount of time? Just maybe broad thoughts on education, because yeah,
I think that you see, one of the main difficulties that we had with the adoption of blockchains and the crypto assets that you can build on top is actually the range of activities in which people suffered from using them. Okay, and this comes because of a lack of an additional basic skill, that is financial education. Okay, and from that point of view, blockchains enable a very low barrier system for educating related to finance, actually, because actually you can get trained in finance in the proper way, not learning how to trade inside of a market. Understanding exactly what your daughter was saying, the examples on that, saying, look, this is the vault in which you deposited, this is the liquidity pool, this is your proof that you have that amount of assets. You see, you can trace it all the time. And then you are getting the rewards because that liquidity pool is generating transactions. You can explain it and the person can actually experience it. And that's the very good thing about blockchains. Here in the university, we have a lot of small scale blockchains. We have a few Ethereum blockchains. We have a Cardano blockchain, a Bitcoin one that we use to teach the students. We want to build a Hedera network in the next month. And the one thing that is very interesting is that actually running this kind of local infrastructure is something that you can do basically for free. And later you can have a lot of very interesting educational pathways for the students, starting from understanding how is it that we build this network, why is it that we trust what is happening there. Everybody can join, everybody can start to mine or to stake, depending on the protocol, and then eventually from there to creating your own tokens, participating in the centralized platform, participating in governance, is something that is very easy to achieve. And actually, the level of pedagogical content that you can build on this is fascinating. I'll just give you an example. Before we started this interview today, we were playing inside of the team because in one of our courses, we will have an exercise in which people need to decide how they want to split a pot of tokens to which they contribute. Okay, and they vote, they make these kind of decisions. And actually, it is a very powerful way of teaching how is it that public goods games work in economics, because you are just experiencing it practically. And all these kind of things is something that some years ago, either you had to work in a very artificial manner, in a very artificial setup. Now with blockchains, once we need education also on the educators, but I don't think that there is anything inherently complicated. Actually, something that makes all our economic and financial systems and even governance systems much more transparent. And that's why I think there is a lot of potential on that.
Yeah, I think it's almost like, I think blockchain opens up the opportunity to really trial out, like, basically how individuals act within a group to decide what's best for the group versus themselves, without kind of hypothetical scenarios. Like, because at the end of the day, if there's financial things at risk. I also think what's going to be interesting is, like, I really do think that the application is so widespread that, like, even if you look at like healthcare, how many times do people go to the doctor right now and the doctor's like, do you smoke? And then some people are like, yeah, I smoke. Do you drink? Some people are like, yeah, I drink. The doctor's like, you should quit smoking and drinking. And the person's like, yeah, okay. And then walks away and doesn't. Exactly. When you start putting some things in the pot there, and it's like, hey, here's an app you can download, and maybe you get some sort of a wallet, and maybe there's incentivization where it's like, for every day you don't do X, Y, and Z, that is kind of the future that I think we're going to. And it's the same thing you were kind of alluding to with education. It's like, think of almost like what Coinbase, I remember even back in 2018, was doing, like the learn and earn things. And it was like 3 or 4 things about each blockchain, and you got rewarded with X, Y, and Z. I can imagine something very similar like that happening, just learning about blockchain in general, which, anyways, I'm going down the rabbit hole. Claudio, I don't want to take too much of your time up today, so I kind of want to lead with some forward-looking statements. Any closing thoughts, anything, what you're kind of excited about the future of the tech? I guess I'll lead in here. When value, data, and identity move, all across shared networks, because I believe we're heading towards a multi-chain kind of future, how do you think institutions, banks, universities, governments, us as individuals all interact and evolve over time? But that's kind of my kind of closing question is like the interoperability question. Your kind of broad thoughts too, anywhere you want to take it.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's going to be very useful in this kind of context is and it's going to, once again, it's going to sound too obvious, but you do not realize the power of transparency that you have in these systems, because even after 15 years of using blockchain, nobody cares much about the transparency that they enable to us, okay? And the fact that we can continuously update the state of everything, of my knowledge, of all the portfolio of assets that I have, of my governance, of the governance decisions of the organizations that are pervading the blockchains, is something that is fundamental for the system. So I think that there is an aspect of we need to get educated into that line. However, the transparency that we are getting thanks to blockchain-based systems is something that, remember that in economics, one of the main problems that you have is asymmetry of information. Blockchains actually solve that issue naturally, because in most of the cases you have ways of accessing the status of all the system. And this is something that is going to enable, as I say, a reduction of friction that we have in many processes that is going to lead to a completely different way of having lifetime. And I just say something that is going to be boring because it's a typical, and I hinted at it when I was talking about the university processes. But you do not know still in 2026 the amount of time that universities spend in verifying the documents coming from other universities. It's something completely ridiculous in the stage in which we are of digitalization. Okay, and this may sound absurd. It is a logistic issue for a lot of people that wants to study in a world that has lower or had for the past decades lower barriers for entry. Okay, and this on the one side. In terms of in other ranges of applications, like for example in finance, the other thing that is very important is that I would like to see much more in the future is also the creation of alternative economic models that is not based on accumulation of capital. Okay, and what I want to say is that there are a lot of much smaller sized communities that for even centuries, decades, and so on. That's why it is so fascinating to have the summer school all around the world. You learn a lot of the ways in which local communities have been solving issues with respect to saving or to putting into a common pot resources such that people can access them when needed. Blockchains enable this as well at a completely unprecedented level. And I think that also this is a completely different range of applications that in general escapes us when we are thinking what blockchains enable. Blockchains do not only enable the creation of the next security, they also allow people, even at a much lower scale, because the barriers are so low, even at the group level, to create their own governance and a set of incentives that satisfy them. And this is, I think, that it is fascinating.
Yeah, you and I briefly talked about this too before, that like I've heard stories where legitimately people in certain jurisdictions or countries made enough money by playing a blockchain game to like feed their family, which I thought was, and it was like a free game like to play for like most of us, where a lot of people in like, you know, in Switzerland or in the US are like playing a game and they're like, $10 or $15, like, so what? But like $15 or $20 in a couple of other countries is like a lot of money. And yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point too about where we might be. Like I was at, I had to get my oldest or help her to get her first car. So I had to buy a used car and it was too old to finance. So I had to write them a check. Yes, I said that. I had to write them a check. Like literally, I was like, I was going to pay with my debit card. And they're like, we don't accept, we don't accept debit card here. Can you write a check? And I had to like drive home, which is crazy to me in 2025. You were talking about digital credentials and being able to streamline those, where I have value and I have the ability to pay for something, but they wouldn't let me do it. So I just think about what that represents for the billions of people that have cell phones but don't have a bank account. There's a lot of opportunity out there. But anyways, Claudio, I definitely wanted to mention to everybody here, please go to blockchain.uzh.ch and you can do a search into the International Summer School. You can actually click and learn more about 2026 applications. They're going to be opening up early next year. Let's get the 80-some people. Well, let's not overwhelm Claudio here, but I'm sure you guys are going to have a problem.
We want to keep increasing the size of the students every year, so that we're really happy to welcome more talented students from all around the world. And the other thing that I want to say, and that's why I'm really happy that you were showing the logo of THA, the Hashgraph Association has been helping us a lot to even internationalize much more the summer school, recruiting as well from the students that participated on their own events that showed a lot of expertise in blockchain, such that they also get a more comprehensive learning experience that like the one that we offer at the university. So we're really thankful to the collaboration that we have with them. We really appreciate your support in all these years.
100%. Well, and at @the_Hashgraph, give Hashgraph Association a follow. And thank you to the Hashgraph Association for putting this together. 7,000 followers. And UZH at UZH_blockchain as well. Claudio, it's been awesome. Don't be a stranger. Would love to do another one in the future with you. And that being said, hang out with me for a second so I make sure I get this recording.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ryan. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.